Hello everyone, it's Tana. Welcome back to another video for the Rabbit Hole Designs. Today we're working with the Advice from a Pumpkin and the Halloween cupcake stamp sets from the latest release. And we're going to make 4 cards today. A slimline, an A2, and 2 mini slimlines. So for the first 2 cards, I already had them planned out and just didn't get a chance to do them in the previous video this month. So they're going to be fairly quick. I ink blended this panel with the Amanda stencil, I believe it's called, from the Rabbit Hole Designs, with dried marigold and vintage photo distress oxide inks. And I had pre-colored my pumpkin image here, and I placed those on a piece of Midnight Plum mirrored cardstock, popped the whole thing up with foam tape, and placed it on a craft card base. I also stuck a little half-inch piece of mirrored plum cardstock across the panel behind the pumpkin. And we're going to stamp out and heat emboss our sentiment, which is give thanks for life's bounty, I believe it says. Now, I love this Advice from a Pumpkin stamp set because you can put Advice from a Pumpkin and then there's a whole bunch of pieces of advice to choose from. But I just chose this sentiment alone for this card. And I really like the way this one turned out with a little bit of purple stuck in there for some added color. On to the next card. We have a slimline card for this one and the cupcakes that you guys previously got a glimpse of in the last video. So I used some Twisted Citron and it's a purple distress oxide. I can't remember if I used wilted. I believe it was wilted violet, but it might have been dusty Concord. But I ink blended just enough where it didn't turn muddy, so there's no brown going on here. Stuck a piece of orange cardstock behind there as a mat, and I'm using a green card base. And I thought these pumpkins needed a little something extra, so I took a spiderweb stencil from my stash and I embossed that through my die cutting machine and picked out the spiderwebs I thought would look the best on the card, and I just fussy cut them around the edges. So we have 2 whole spiderwebs and then a half a spiderweb for the middle. And now I'm just going to line up where the cupcakes will be, and that's the only place I'm going to glue down my vellum spiderwebs. And I like this. I thought that this card needed a little extra something behind the cupcakes, and this was perfect. And definitely something I want to play around with again. I think this is the first time I've ever thought of embossing my vellum through a die cutting machine with a stencil. So we'll have to play around with that idea some more in the future. Popped up all 3 cupcakes with foam tape, and we're going to put those right over their glue spots so we hide that glue on the vellum. And then all this one needs is a sentiment. So we're going to use that same orange cardstock that we used as a mat, and we're going to stamp out the sentiment that comes with the cupcake, which is "You're so sweet, it's scary." And I also very carefully colored and fussy cut out these 3 spiders that came in the stamp set and put 1 on each spider web. So there's my sentiment, and I'm going to place it very carefully up at the top between the first and second pumpkin's hats. And that's it for the second card. So now we're moving on to the mini slimlines. Now, there's my Distress Oxide colors up there on the screen. I'm going to ink blend one panel on camera and do the other off camera. I knew what I wanted to do in my mind, but when it's all said and done, you guys will have to let me know in the description box if you would have done it a little differently, and you'll see what I mean at the end here. I still like my main idea for the card. I just think maybe they ended up a little bit too busy. So anyway, we have 2 ink blended panels, and I was trying to go with fall colors here, and I really didn't expect them to be this bright. I probably should have used a more muted yellow, but other than that, I didn't expect them to be this bright. And now we're going to use both of those panels to stamp out some of the images from the Advice from a Pumpkin stamp set. And I'm using a brown for this first panel to stamp all these out. And on the other panel, I use a dark red to stamp out my images. Now, I stamped out a lot of images and fussy cut a lot of images. And I think that's part of the reason that I added so much to the card, because I didn't want to see them go to waste, but I don't know. You'll have to let me know. Now I'm going to take some of the same colors in cardstock as well as I could match them up. And I'm going to start cutting some strips. And I'm not measuring. I'm just trying to make sure I have some that are thick, some that are thin, some that are longer than others. And I didn't want to use the same craft that I used in the previous card as a card base. So I used like a very light tan cardstock for the cream or tan. Or brown, you might want to say. I didn't want to use a dark brown cardstock. Now I'm taking some very wide double-sided adhesive, and I'm covering four. You don't see it, but I do 4 of them. Mini slimline card fronts, so 3.5 by 6.5, and then I'll just trim them down. And I'm going to start to lay out my strips. Now, I did it so I could conserve as much as possible because I knew I wanted to play around with the background. So I did 2 diagonally striped and tried to lay them as close to the edge as I could. And then I do 2 up and down stripes. Now, vertical stripes. You might notice as I'm laying these down that there are a couple tiny corners that are missing on the top or the bottom. And that's because I should have made my yellow and my red strips a little bit longer, but it didn't matter because I knew I'd be trimming the panels down, so that didn't bother me. So there are my 2 diagonal and my 2 vertical stripes. Now I'm going to cut those out with some dies from my stash so that they're a little bit smaller and they have a decorative edge around them. I'm going to use a piece of craft cardstock as a mat on the card bases. Now the card bases are white, and that's another reason I didn't use that craft in my stripes, because it would have been the same as the mat. And I'm going to use 1 vertical and 1 diagonal striped pattern and glue those right down on top of their mats. Now I'm going to use 2 circles that I cut out from my stash. And that first circle has just got it was a leftover piece of cardstock that had some score lines in it. And I thought it made a good pattern, so I kept it and I cut my circle out of it. The other one's regular craft cardstock, just like the mat. And now I have fussy cut out my pumpkins. And originally I was going to use 2 of the same design, but I switched it up with the second one and went for the other pumpkin. And I still think I'm doing okay here. They don't look too busy. I stamped out Advice from a Pumpkin, once in green on craft and once in red on craft. And then I stamped out Think Big and Keep Growing. I think this is where I made the mistake here, as it was such a shame to have all those very small, very cute images. And I started to lay them out like flowers were falling from the sentiment strips. And I did that on both of them. And then I even added some espresso jewels to like the center of the flowers and a couple around the pumpkins. So, I don't know. Part of me says too busy. Part of me thinks they turned out cute. You guys definitely let me know in the description box below what you think. Regardless, I love this stamp set. I think it's perfect for fall, and there's a lot you can do with it. And that's it, guys. 4 cards for this video in less than 10 minutes. I don't think that's bad at all. Don't forget to sign up for the Rabbit Hole Designs email so you can be aware of new releases and tons of inspiration. And look for the Rabbit Hole Designs on Instagram as well so you can follow the design team's inspiration throughout the month. We will see you in the next video, guys. Bye-bye for now.